My name is Jeffrey Allen Silveroff, and in 1994 I met a person who was so severely abused by the federal government that I wrote her story on my website. According to her Social Security file, which I have complete, she was seized by human traffic, that the person who claimed to be her mother on federal documents refused to take a blood test which was type matching because 40 years ago or 50 years ago there was no DNA matching. This person could not produce a birth certificate supporting her claim that she was the beneficiary's mother. The Justice Department and the Department of Census claim to have done a thorough investigation and found out that this payee applicant had not had a child not only in the year that the beneficiary was born, but in the year previous and in the year afterwards. And instead of investigating this person further, they just told Social Security to find another payee because Ruth Butler was not kosher. Instead, Social Security wrote a letter to Ruth Butler, and they told her that if she would take a blood test, which in those days was merely type matching and could show the possibility of maternity, that she would be made the payee, and at that time she probably would have received somewhere around $10,000. Instead, Ruth Butler refused to take that test. The penalty for lying on a federal document is 5 years in prison and a stiff fine. In spite of the fact that Ruth Butler refused to take that test, the Justice Department went no further. I met Wanda Butler in 1994. And when Wanda Butler told me that she was receiving disability, I was quite amazed because I couldn't see anything in her manner or effect which indicated to me that she was disabled. She told me that she was not getting any money or support from the person who had been appointed payee after 29 years. And in spite of the fact that this person refused to take a simple blood test to show the possibility of maternity, that person was eventually made the payee after 29 years. And she took that money, which was probably in the vicinity of $100,000 plus or minus, and invested it in the family drug cartel. Everybody bought a new car. Wanda, however, continued to sleep on the sofa and was consigned to answering the door at all hours of the day and night for people showing up to buy narcotics. Well, I told Wanda to go to Social Security, tell them she wasn't getting her money from her payee, and Wanda told me that she had been locked out of the Social Security office. Now, I had observed Wanda for quite some time. One of the first times I saw Wanda, she was taking up residence in a dumpster on a rainy night behind a place called Sophie's Golden Moon, which was a drug, hooker, and gang hangout. I had gone there after playing at a bar mitzvah. I'm a musician, depending on your abilities, and I had stopped in for a libation because I didn't drink while I worked. So while I was having I had a beer and I left. And while I was getting in my car, I saw this person, who I thought at first was dumpster diving, but actually she was clearing out a space on top of the garbage so that she could sleep. And the reason she was going to sleep on the garbage is because she didn't want to go back to the crack house, which was run by Ruth Butler, and be around the people who had literally raped her all of her life. By the age of 5, these people were renting Wanda out to be used as a masturbatory WASHRAG. But getting back to when I met her, she asked me if I would rent her a room. And when I asked her how much she could afford, she told me she wasn't getting any money. And that's what led to my finding out that she could not talk to Social Security personnel. We exchanged numbers, and I told her to see what she could do and to give me a call. She called me up 1 or 2 days later, and she was very upset. She wanted to know if I could rent her a room. She had heard that I was a nice man, and because her proof of my being a nice man was she had never seen me try to pick up a hooker or buy drugs. This was her criteria. I didn't know what to do. I knew where I had seen Wanda. I knew that she was in dire straits. So I took her to see the most infallible judges of human character I knew, my parents. My father had had a serious stroke, and he was bedridden. My mother had undiagnosed emphysema, and she never left the house. She never left it. And I was on my way to do their chores, which I did 3 or 4 times a week, and I would fill up a big white station wagon with all kinds of supplies. Fill it up 3 or 4 times a week. I don't know what those tiny little people did with all of that stuff. Maybe they were feeding a third world country. I told Wanda that I would pick her up where she was living, but she did not want the people she was living with to know that she knew me. So I met her back in the same terrible place where she had introduced herself to me, Helen's bar. I met her there, and I took her to my parents' house, and my mother opened the door, and she sees me standing there with this tiny black woman, and she gave me a look that said that she had a question, and I said, "Mother, I want you to listen to Wanda, and when I get back, tell me what you think." She then gave me the keys to her station wagon, and I went off to do her shopping. It took about 3 or 4 hours, and when I came back, my mother told me that this was the most terrible thing that she ever heard. And I asked my mother if it was going to be too much of an Ibercairnish to give Wanda what she wanted. Ibercairnish is like trouble. And my mother gave me that look like she always gave me, like I'm a stupid ass, which I basically am. And she goes into her pocketbook, and she gets out her checkbook, and she writes me a check for the better part of $500, and she tells me to get Wanda everything she needs because she's never going to get anything that she back from those momsers, and to take her to my home and put her in the best room. Don't let anybody bother her, and don't ask her any questions. When the Butlers learned where Wanda had sought refuge and found it, they began to vandalize my house. They literally burned down 3 of my cars. Wanda was under a state of siege. Whenever she would walk the 7 or 8 blocks to the quick shop to get cigarettes, she would be accosted by people who had drug houses associated with the Butlers in the area where I lived in Rock Island. The distance between Rock Island and Davenport is very short. These are cities in 2 different states. I tried to do what Wanda wanted me to do and find out where she came from, because she had heard people in the Butler family tell her that she was not really of their blood. And the first time she heard this was when Olden Butler Sr. was raping her at the age of 4. And he told her that he could do this because he wasn't her blood. I eventually found out through an appeal that I filed on Wanda's behalf with the Social Security Administration that Wanda was not of the blood of the Butlers. It took me almost 3 years to get Wanda's Social Security file in preparation for this appeal. They did not want to give it to me, but when I did, I found out some things that so totally overwhelmed me that eventually, through my relationship with Wanda Butler, knowing her, falling in love with the kindest, gentlest person that I had ever met, I married Wanda Butler, and the interference of her family and the police, who I saw forcibly place her back into a crack house against her will over a dozen times during the time that I was with her. And when these people started to threaten my parents by calling their home, and that was not an easy thing to do, because my parents had an unlisted number. Now, there are only 2 entities that a third party can get an unlisted number from. One of those would, of course, be the phone company. But if the phone number is unlisted, you can't go there. The other entity is law enforcement, the police. That's the only other entity they could have gotten it from, and they got it that unlisted number. And during the time when I had met Wanda, I was visited, well, I was in a local bistro, by members of the Butler family, who told me that I should persuade Wanda to sell their narcotic products out of my house, that they had a deal with 5-0 on both sides of the river, and that nothing would happen to me. Well, Wanda didn't want to associate with them anymore. That's why she had sought me out. So I told them that. I said, Wanda doesn't want to do this. That's why she's living in my house, which they knew by that time, because there were crack houses associated with them and a barbershop that was selling their drugs. This barbershop was owned by the Brooks family. After I had told the Butlers to bugger off and not bother myself or Wanda anymore, they began to vandalize my home. They destroyed my cars. But when they called my parents and threatened them, I had pretty much had enough. So I took about $7,000 out of my Merrill Lynch account, which goes to show you what happened to the rest of my retirement money, and I bought some video cameras and other equipment. Some of those video cameras were so small you could put them in a buttonhole of a shirt, and I caught everybody. Now, I didn't believe the Butlers when they first told me they had a deal with the constabulary on both sides of the river. But after looking at the situation through the lenses of some very good video cameras, after hiring people, because at the time I had money and I could pay for this, I hired people who had the look, and many of those people were graduates of various correctional facilities. And we infiltrated, and we filmed on the street, and we busted out a lot of people who were using the street to sell narcotics, to poison people. I freely gave copies of those tapes to the local constabulary in Rock Island and in Davenport. I was contacted by both of those agencies eventually, who asked me to pick up my videotapes, or they would destroy them. These messages were left on my answering machine, and I answered those answering machines back. And I left a message on those answering machines of those policemen who called me saying, if you want to destroy evidence, you can go right ahead, but I won't help you. I eventually gave a compilation tape of the best of the Brooks family, the former Rock Island alderman, to Crime Stoppers. Crime Stoppers gave that video to the people who were featured on it selling narcotics, and I started being shot at. I then moved to a little town 30 miles away in Iowa, and if I had known that moving to Calamus, Iowa was for an Orthodox Jew like moving to Germany circa 1938, I would not have gone. I have become famous or infamous. The government, both state and federal, has seen to it that slander and lies taint my record. I've already talked for 17 minutes. But I want to tell you that after I published Wanda's true story on freeworldkgb.freeservers.com, that is when the shit hit the fan. I have been arrested over 400 times in the city of Rock Island, merely for having a video camera in my car. The police are in all of my accounts. They desperately want to know who has been helping me and who still continue, the people who still continue to help me, even though at this time I don't have money to pay them. Pray for Wanda Butler. I have been imprisoned twice for almost 5 years. All because I helped this person, who the federal government went the extra mile to make sure could be used as a slave by the Butler family. There will be more on other videos. Please pray for Wanda. Wanda never wanted to be what these people wanted to turn her into. Wanda wanted to be June Cleaver. But because Wanda is black, no social agency would ever help her. And the only reason I filed the appeal for her, which I won, which every attorney told me was a lost cause, the only reason I filed that is because she was turned away by every Social Security litigator within a 100-mile radius of Davenport. Legal aid wouldn't even help her. And the reason why legal aid wouldn't help her is because she's black. And I can say that without any fear of contradiction, because I have recently come in contact during the past year with a person named Jackie Bloomer, who has been told by her landlord that she cannot have her boyfriend, a relationship which he's had for quite some time, visit her at her home because her landlord doesn't like black people and doesn't want black people on the property. I asked Jackie Bloomer to call Legal Aid in Davenport and ask them if they would help her with this situation, which violates federal laws. And Legal Aid in Davenport turned her down. I'm going to assume that's because the person that she wants to have visit her is black. I never lived in eastern Iowa before I moved to Calamus. I never officially lived here. But this is the most racist place I've ever been. I've been a musician, professional musician, since I was 13. I played in almost every state. And I have never seen racism with the kind of je ne sais quoi with which it is displayed in eastern Iowa. Thank you for your time. I'm sure we'll be visiting again.